Good evening, everyone. Happy Thursday and welcome to Office Hours. Really excited for tonight. I'm really excited for our conversation that we're going to have with Emily Lawson, tonight's guest. For those of you who are joining Office Hours for the first time, my name is Kamara Toffolo. I'm a resume writer, LinkedIn consultant, and job search strategist who helps working professionals dare to do work differently and land great fitting gigs. So enough about me, let me introduce Emily. So Emily Lawson is a certified executive career transitions coach and former corporate HR business partner. And her primary focus is really to help executive leaders transition their careers and work with companies that are really aligned with their core values and authentically support a positive culture. So Emily really leverages her HR backgrounds to help her clients navigate the world of recruiting and hiring. And before we went live, we were just talking about how amazing she is with visuals. And we're going to show you a few of those visuals in a little bit because they're truly outstanding. So without further ado, let me welcome Emily to the stream. Hello, hey, Emily. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining. How are you doing this evening?
Doing great. I hope you are. I have to say out of the gate, the accent is to die for. I'm so jealous. I kind of just want to sit and listen to you. That would be awesome.
Well, if you're lucky, you're going to hear me throw in a few A's here and there.
So. I love it. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I apologize in advance, everybody. I think that I'm having some internet issues at the moment. I hope that they don't cause any major problems. So Emily, tonight we're really talking about really like reclaiming control of our job search. Because especially at this time, the conditions that we're in now, it feels out of control, right?
Sure.
And a lot of people talk about like the hiring process being broken. So let's start with that, that very controversial type of statement. So what do you think it is that causes people to really feel like the hiring process is broken?
Well, I mean, my first instinct is to say that it is, but having been in HR, I will say that I think it's primarily two things. One is the hiring process is designed to support the employer, not the prospective employee, right? So when you're a job seeker and you have a certain expectation of how that process is going to look for you, and it doesn't work out that way, then it's just overwhelming, especially if you haven't been in the market to transition or you've been networked from positions in the past and suddenly you're having to understand how to build out your personal marketing collateral, how to effectively navigate the job search market, networking strategies, throw in a pandemic, and it's going to overwhelm most people. But the reality is if you really understand the hiring process, especially for each employer, because it's always going to be a little bit different. If you can get the intel on what that looks like for your target employer, then you can set out the right game plan. And then it's the process of execution, right? The daily tasks, being consistent, self-care, things like that to balance it out. So it's more just bridging the knowledge gap for the job seeker, I feel, and having realistic expectations.
That makes so much sense. So that's interesting. You say like having an understanding of what the hiring process looks like, say for your target employer. So how do we gain insight into that?
Yeah, I think you first have to consider your level, right? So if you are under the VP level, your career transition is going to look very different, right? So it's going to be a combination of who you know internally that can champion you, as well as online applications. And we can dig that apart if you want to. But it's a balanced approach. Whereas, really in the executive space, it has more to do with not only who you know, but also third-party sourcing, executive recruitment. And so the companies that I've been in, we may be contracted, say, with 6 or 7 different firms, but we really only use 1 or 2, right? Depending on if it's tech or whatever. So understanding who those third-party sources are and informational interviews with others who are doing similar work to yourself can give you some of that insight. Once you have that information, then you can go and get your information in with that firm so that they can champion you in and also work on your network within.
So really, very, very much a multi-pronged approach or attack.
It's going to look totally different for every job seeker. That's why it's so confusing.
Yeah.
So you really have to understand like your level and your target companies and how they recruit. And it requires some work and research.
That's such a great point. And yeah, I'd love to dig into that a little bit. Before we do, I'm just going to pop over to the chat. And hello, Ricklin. Thanks for joining us. Ricklin says hello. And hello, Aaron from Montgomeryville, PA, Pennsylvania, right? This Canadian's not very good at US geography.
Great.
And thanks. And Jamie mentioned, I've been unemployed since April and I'm concerned my salary requirements are against me. I'm middle-aged. That's something that we could maybe talk about in a little bit.
Yeah,
so
I'd love to.
Yeah, for sure. So everybody, thank you for joining us tonight. Whoever else is joining us on LinkedIn or YouTube, please let us know where you're from. Would love to hear from everybody. And also, please give the video a like on YouTube and a reaction on LinkedIn, whichever platform you're using tonight. So we were talking about the research, the legwork for figuring out kind of the recruiting process, really. So you were mentioning informational interviews. So does it really, would you say it really starts at the networking?
I really feel like it needs to be a balanced approach, right? And an understanding, first and foremost, who do you know in the company, whether you're aware of a job through a job search engine or a job board or however you come to know of the opening. First and foremost, know who you know within, right? And leverage that, get those relationships warmed up. And then whether you decide to apply through the company's site or try to have someone internally champion you, either way, you're still going to have to get your information into their HRIS at some point. Nobody's really exempt from that on the majority. And so it's, it is a balanced approach. I don't think that for everyone, it's a full court press on networking or that it's a full court press on online applications. There's a place for both. And I think it's understanding, your level and the companies and your network within and having a more strategic approach.
For sure. So when we have a good idea of our level, well, we would know our level. So how does the level itself really inform that strategy?
Sure. So lower levels, you're going to have a much higher volume, but they're also hiring more of those positions. And so typically you're going to find more of those jobs online. And it's a little bit easier to get someone to champion you in because everybody wants to help kind of that, entry level applicant, right? It gets a little bit more complicated as you get higher through the ranks. But again, job boards and job search engines are a great place to be aware of opportunities. But if you're really serious about it and being proactive, like I know you and I both would advocate that you not try to find a job when you don't have one, but to be proactive, have those target companies, research them out, understand what their current focus is. Even LinkedIn Premium has a great little metric for the company to show which departments they're growing in, which ones are declining, if they've had a recent hiring surge. Get down in the data and get clear about what those opportunities could look like for you, and then work on building your network there too.
Oh, that's a great point. Do you know what that metric is called?
I think it's hiring by departments, hires by department.
Okay.
Mhm.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
That would be really insightful for anyone who
Yeah,
has premium.
well, yeah, and the cool thing too, just to nerd out on the HR side, when you look at the company on LinkedIn, their metrics are really quite good, and you can look at their length of tenure average for each employee, so you can get an idea on if they've had a recent big turnover, and especially they show leadership. So if you've had a big turnover in leadership, or there's just been a recent merger or acquisition, things like that really change the environment and the culture, right? And so it's going to help you shape the right questions if you are in an interview with them. But yeah, LinkedIn has great information on companies with that premium membership to kind of highlight those key areas, to show growth, financial health, things like that too.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So this episode is really about what we can control. And as we're getting further along in this conversation, it's becoming super clear to me, and I think people tuning in, that there is just so much that you actually can control in your job search.
Yeah, there really is. And I think, ownership is important. Yes, you can't control, how a company hires. You can't control the opportunities that may or may not surface or are available. You really can't even control the hiring team's response to you. I mean, the reality is they might have someone internally slated. They might have an upcoming reorg, and that job no longer is going to be available, right? Budgets may have changed. There's so many things that shift around on the other side that are out of your control. But the minute that you recognize and just kind of let go of that and really focus on yourself as a candidate, and really speaking to your value and making sure that your resume is where it needs to be, you know how to use your LinkedIn profile effectively, and you really get aware of the right data and research, even like the individual who had the question about being unemployed since April and her salary, really understanding your worth in the market and knowing how to speak to that. All those things help you target the right jobs that you know you're going to be qualified for. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's connecting the dots. If you're highly qualified and it's really clear what your value is, chances are the employer is going to connect the dots and want to have that conversation.
That's wonderful. So that really gives us all quite a bit of hope for job searching in this very trying time. I like that you highlighted what's outside of certain things that are outside of our control. I think you posted about this recently as well, in terms of like, you don't know and you can't control if they had an internal candidate in mind.
Right.
Budget, there could have been budgets impacted, and the position could have been pulled entirely. Someone could be on vacation and decision can't be made yet. There's when it comes to that. So while there's a lot we want to control and should control when we can, what we can't control, as you say, it's important to be aware of that too. And in being aware of that, that's so empowering.
Oh, yeah. And I think so many job seekers take the process personally when they don't get the response that they're expecting, or maybe it's not within the time frame that they would like it to be, or maybe the feedback they don't agree with, right? It is really important not to take it personally and to just truly focus on kind of where you're a rock star and knowing how to speak to that without overselling, right? But just truly speaking to your authentic value, being honest, making it very clear and easy for HR to connect the dots, right? And we can talk about that too. But the minute that you start to take it personally and it gets in your head, it just creates all kinds of other issues. So it's important to recognize that there is still a lot. And two, a lot of companies are quite dysfunctional. in their, I hate to say that, but
I
it's
love
true.
that
And then,
I love that you called that out though.
I mean, we're in a pandemic, and the reality is I am glad, and oh, my heart goes out to the people in HR right now. I can't even cannot imagine how overwhelmed they would be trying to get their workforce virtual and process hiring. It just blows my mind.
Yeah, it's intense. Like
Yeah.
and onboarding people in new ways that may have not
Yeah.
even been created, and
Yep.
it's a lot. It's a lot.
It is.
So on that note, it's important for job seekers to exhibit empathy towards people in recruiting and HR and talent acquisition. So especially at this time, would you agree?
Yeah, I would. I think and I'm always gonna kind of pitch that HR side. But I do think it's important for the job seeker to know that their job search effort might be their full-time job, but your job campaign is not the recruiter's full-time job. You're one of like 100, possibly positions that they're looking to fill, probably more like 30. And then all the candidates associated with each position. And by law, they legally have to target those who are most qualified, right? Through their hard skills, education, experience, all those things, and the right fit. So, you might be itching for that response and update, but there's also a lot of legal ways that their hands are tied and they can't share information. And they're so busy and they're trying to juggle all these different things. So, yeah, I know it's frustrating, but if you can just look at it from the other side, that does help give perspective.
For sure. For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to pop over to the chat because I've seen some action here and I don't want to miss anything. So T. Sheldon says hi from Bellevue, Washington. Catherine is hi from Miami. Crystal from Atlanta. Yukio from Japan. We've gone global now. Don from Toronto. Jamie from Nashville. Sonia from Toronto. Laura from Austin. And Laura has a question. So transitioning from US Navy and trying to figure out how to even get an interview since the HR military is so different from civilian.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. So I think regardless of what your background is and whatever skills or experience that you bring to the table, again, this may not be what job seekers want to hear, but you literally have to paint the picture. You have to hand it over to the prospective employer on a silver platter, literally, and connect the dots. So I think it's important to understand your audience, and you may have grabbed one of the graphs related to this, but most companies use some type of applicant tracking software. They're really not evil. They're really not. Recruiters still see what they need to see. But you have software. You have recruiters who honestly are looking at hiring very different than the back end of HR is looking at it. You've got, your mid-level or senior level HR. You have the hiring team. You have the hiring manager. And they're all looking through a different lens at your information, right? So one of the things that I'd mentioned on one of your posts was about funneling your resume, right? And we can talk a bit more about that. But the high level is you really have to kind of spell out your value, be very clear about what they're asking for from that job, and then connect the dots for them. Make sure all your content relates. Just have it be crystal clear and jump off the page, exactly how you're qualified and the right fit. So you do have to do some work in understanding, that job, the essential functions, pain points, all those things, and really customize and tailor your experience and translate how it relates for them for that job.
For sure. Sorry, I was saying as I was I had a frozen screen on my end, so sorry about that. I was trying to share your funnel image. Let me see if I can fix this because this is such a great. Oh, do you see it there, Emily?
I do, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. So this is just such a great representation of what you were mentioning in terms of tailoring to your audience, having awareness of the different kind of touch points along the way. Was there anything else you wanted to point out about your hiring funnel?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I could go on for days about it. So I know I don't have a visual, but that post that we'd engaged on about funneling, in a resume, you can actually funnel your information for all audiences too. So like we all know that with applicant tracking software is keywords, key phrases,
right,
and typically taken from the job description itself. And you can use a cool tool like JobScan and generate what that looks like. But HR, really isn't as interested in that information. So typically keywords, I kind of put in their own separate core competencies section. Another way that I'm a little bit strategic with keywords is instead of it ruining the content of my resume, I'll actually put it underneath like each title, right? And then put those core keywords for each job. And that's actually really helpful for recruiters, especially if you're in IT, to really understand, which tools or languages or what have you related to that specific job. But that's a great way to integrate that in. Then when you're looking at more like mid or back end of HR, like that front end, right? So like recruiters, they're checking boxes, right? It's really quite static. It's, education, experience, length of tenure, just making sure that your compensation's where it needs to be with a phone screen, things like that. They're just verifying that you are technically qualified. And then typically your HR manager or HRBP, we're going to dive a bit deeper into fit to the team, not just cultural fit to the company, but, everyone's wired differently. And so, if you have a team with a lot of, like if you're using DISC, if you have a team with a lot of D's on there, you're not going to throw another D in the mix of that team, right? You need to balance it out. You need that diversity. Statistically, we have higher performance and engagement with that diversity. So we're mindful of we're looking through a different lens. And then the hiring team, they're looking for somebody that they like, they respect, and they trust, right? Somebody that they can truly collaborate with. And then who you would report to is like, can this person get the job done and make my pain go away without being too much for me to manage? So their lens is a little bit different too. So the way all that translates in a resume is, you've got keywords scaled in, but you can front load value statements for like the hiring team. You can integrate some behavioral analytics in a cover letter for the back end of HR. There's a lot of strategies that you can use with your content to meet your audience at every layer of the funnel so that you continue to get traction. But I do think it's important to you to understand that your resume is just a ticket to an interview, right? So it has its function. And then once you start talking with real people, it's really about how you explain your value in an authentic, genuine way. And you make that connection. It's the right fit.
I love it. I love it. And I'm obsessed with this funnel, like, honestly. I wish I could create something like this. It's just so easy to follow, and it really helps job seekers understand the different layers, as you say, of the audience that they need to speak to. So I love this. This is just awesome.
Oh, thank you. I'll also, that's so nice. I'll also add that, there's a lot of debate about cover letters and whatnot. And I think it's important with that funnel too, that, most applicant tracking software, if you're uploading a cover letter, is considering that just the same as your resume when it comes to keywords, right? But your cover letter really is that one place where you can communicate to HR, especially the back end of HR, what's motivating your application, your alignment to the organization, and truly point out those key differentiators. And I can't stress enough that once you get down to like 3 to 6 candidates, we're going to use that cover letter. We're going to dive into it. And if you've just kind of copied and pasted and changed the name of the company and the date, that says something, right? And probably not what you want it to. So
I'm glad you brought that up because I'm very much pro cover letter. And I see it as at worst as like an insurance policy. Like
Sure.
like you don't want to be caught without a cover letter in the case where it could have been, as you're saying, the differentiator, right? So
Sure.
anyway,
Yeah,
that's a whole different episode.
It is.
Cover letters.
It really is.
So I just there's just another comment in here, a question here. What if you're on the spectrum like I am? The whole process is a huge challenge for someone like me.
Mhm.
Understandable.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to someone who's on the spectrum?
It is hard, but I think when you look at the process, the really great thing about being on the spectrum is you're typically going to be more data driven and process driven, right? So if you dig a bit deeper into the data and you truly understand how the software works, how the hiring funnel works, and you know how to meet each level with the right information, that preparation is going to absolve some of the anxiety associated with the communication issues. So for example, when you get a first phone screen, right? They're not interested in building a big bond or spending a lot of time. They want to ensure that your compensation expectation meets within the range of that job, right? They're really verifying, some soft questions, but they're really just verifying what's on your resume, right? And so and you can even just Google, like, it's like the same 15 questions pretty much every single time. You can Google that, like phone screen questions. Have those answers. Those are very static, right? When it comes to an interview, I always say full transparency is the way to go. You can even be very human and just come from that place and explain, I'm having difficulty with this, and they will find that so refreshing, and they'll try to meet you where you're at to make it a successful interview. And, it shouldn't be a stumbling block. And I think in some ways it can be your advantage because you're not over romanticizing things, right? You're looking at it from a different place.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I love your advice. That's wonderful. And I hope that was helpful. I didn't see a name there. Sometimes LinkedIn doesn't pass us the names of the people asking. So please don't be offended that you're showing up just as LinkedIn user. We have a question from Sonia here. When organizations here majorly require Canadian experience, and how do we go about it? And similarly, US experience.
Okay.
How to find a company that is ready to give you the opportunity, even if you're new in Canada or the US.
Yeah, I think, again, it's kind of like the Army question, right? So if you're coming from a totally different environment, some of the same methodologies that you would apply if you're trying to transition your career into a different industry or field, those transferable things, right? You're kind of looking at that differently. But again, you have to look at the receiver, who that audience is and what they're looking for. You find what's synonymous in your experience and you translate it for them, right? You remove the stumbling blocks so that they can clearly see the connection on how you're qualified and how you not being from that environment perhaps might lend an advantage. Perhaps you have experience from your prior environment that others who didn't have it wouldn't have, right? So you just kind of have to lean in onto that differentiator, make it clear, but then also you leverage it as a strength to find those strengths.
I totally agree. I work with a lot of newcomers to Canada or folks who have immigrated and been here a while. And absolutely, we always use their international experience as a strength to lean on because it offers refreshing and new ways of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
And perhaps the company's looking to expand into international markets. So as you say, it's very likely an advantage, less a disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah, good. These are great questions. And if people are popping in a little later, Brenda from Mumbai, we're very global tonight.
Wow.
Masako from New York City. We've got Kushal from Houston, quite a bit of representation from Houston. This is great. And Eddie from Atlanta. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So I'm wondering if we can dig into what you think people should do if they're not hearing back from employers or recruiters.
Oh, it's painful, isn't it? It's
so painful.
It's painful because typically where you're not hearing back and where it's painful is if you've had some human contact, right? So if you get the automatic generated response from the applicant tracking software, that's a little less personal. But if you've had a conversation with a human and then they go dark on you, it's just hard because you put so much work into the process to that point. Or even worse, you've gone through multiple rounds of interviews and then it just kind of whatever. So I will say from the hiring side, again, it's a lot of what we mentioned earlier, and I would give extra leniency in a pandemic on this. There's so much going on the other side. And if you're further along in the process and they go dark, it very well could be that they've extended an offer to somebody else and they're waiting for that confirmation, but they want to keep you warm just in case, right? If you don't hear back early on, it could be that they're waiting to get all those initial phone screens done before they take a group through. That's why sometimes it's helpful if you've talked with anyone who's been recently hired on what their experience was like going through the funnel, because it can look different. If they're looking to hire quickly, it's going to look very different than if they're pooling a bunch of like entry-level candidates, right? So you just have to know that it's going to always be different. There's a great rule of thumb, and that is always give it a week. Always give it a week. If you are over communicating, it's so hard. It's not that HR is evil and that they don't want to give you feedback or they are holding information from you or whatever. It truly is that they either legally have their hands tied or just don't have the information to share yet and are so busy that they don't want to go back and forth with constant communication or build a relationship with you, if they don't have that ability to do that. So if you're not hearing back, again, just once a week, you can reach out, bring awareness. If you've applied, I always recommend, bringing awareness that you've put your application in. It's someone, that's great. But I've had a lot of clients actually do this cold, where they'll apply, they'll reach out they'll identify who is associated in that area with HR, reach out, bring awareness, or other people on the team, and I will say, Kamara, that one of my personal pet peeves is these like hard stamped templates. So I really think there's a really good way to do this, and it doesn't involve like the same language, because when you get a lot of those templated messages, it's hard. It's just really hard. So if you come to that message and you include like the job ID number, that's really helpful.
That's good to know.
That's super helpful for us, especially if you have a lot of jobs. And you explain why, what is motivating your interest, what makes you different, and keep it to no more than 3, preferably like 1 or 2, right?
So if you're strengths or 3 sentences or
3 differentiators, 1 to 3 differentiators. Really what makes you different as a candidate, or what's really motivating your application. Why are you so interested in this job? That tells us you're not blanket applying, you're genuinely interested, you want to engage. And that's for anybody in that hiring process. If it's just someone associated with that department, or a connection that you have, or even if it's cold, you can say, hey, I just applied for this job. I would love to get your take on your experience in the company, and just start a conversation.
I love
that. Keep it simple, make it really easy for them to respond back to you. Keep the ask very tiny and just start the engagement. If you blanket them with a lot of information, it's not good. It's hard to respond. It's not that they're mean. It's just it's time.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I like what you say, like make the ask small and just like ask them what their experience has been like. It's almost like a micro informational interview.
Microbites.
Microbites.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Microbites.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned when you are doing the follow-up or the messaging or the reach outs that you want to mention that you have already applied.
Yes.
Ricklin, who's watching and was on the episode last week, and she and I did a Clubhouse panel earlier this week. She said, "Don't circumvent the process." She's
Girl,
also an HR.
I love her for this. And I recently connected with her, she was in HR. And I'm just going to say, I need to start like an HR career coach club because it's a different view. So I didn't quite catch that part, but I'll just say from my experience, it doesn't matter who you are. Like you have to follow the process, right? So there are legal ramifications to not following employment law as it pertains to discrimination, bias. We get a ton of claims every year for all those very things. And if we're not consistent in our process, then we're actually putting the employer at risk of litigation. So yes, and yes, right? Apply first, get your information in the HRIS, apply through the company site, build a candidate profile, set in your interests so you can actually get notifications in the future for a job it sees you as being qualified for if that one doesn't work out. But get in the system, because if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I know a guy and he's really great, I'm going to say, hey, that's great. And I'm glad you know him, but he needs to get his information into the system, and then I can pull him forward and take a look at it. So once you're in the system, then bring awareness. It makes it really easy for those involved in the hiring process to access your information and then continue to move you forward. It's the easier you can make it flow and connect the dots on the hiring side, the better off you're going to be as a job seeker.
Love it. Don't not apply online.
Well, I will say this too. I've been researching this ad nauseum lately.
Oh yeah.
So I'm going to write an article. But what's interesting to me, and I would love to know Ricklin's take on it too. We did a lot of hiring through online applications. And I've been in startup, I've been in mid-sized companies, I've been in the largest bedding manufacturer in the world, right? So I've seen recruiting in so many different spaces, and it's it's always the same thing. There's still I'm going to say it out loud, but there's still what I've seen, the majority of hires that come from the online process. The higher the level, though, that does shift, right? So I'm doing research, I'm gathering data. I recently did a poll on LinkedIn, and I asked people who are in HR to vote, and they're substantiating that information. I've been aggregating data from different applicant tracking software systems, and it's confirming the same thing. I think where people get confused is this. I think I've identified the key piece. As a job seeker, it lends an advantage to network, right? So you have a much higher rate of getting an interview and getting hired because HR knows that referrals are typically going to be a better fit, right? We're going to have higher retention, higher engagement, higher performance. So it's a win all the way around, right? So the advantage to the job seeker is definitely to go through a referral if you can get one. And it's like 4 times as hard. You have to work 4 times as much to get through the online application process. But if you spell it out, you make it clear, you're highly qualified, you're going to get reviewed, right? If you can speak to your value and you're the right fit, you're going to continue on in the process. So I'll come out with more data on it, but I do think it's interesting. There's a lot of things that are said about it, and I'm determined to figure it all out. So my experience has been different.
I can't wait to see it. And you're right. You're right about how networking gives you an advantage.
Absolutely.
But you don't do just networking. You don't do just applying online. You
Right.
do both.
Absolutely.
You do both. You don't do one or the other. So
Yes.
yeah. Anyway, wonderful. So I just want to circle back to that earlier question that we were getting, because I've now seen 2 questions about salary. So Jamie asked this way at the beginning of the broadcast. Concerned about salary requirements and working against.
No, this is where you have to do the work too, right? So you might, a lot where this really trips people up is if they've had extended tenure in one company, because they tend to be incentivized for retention by increasing their compensation. And then from the HR side, we end up with things like wage compression, where it's called a red circle rate, where somebody's at the very end of their band or their grade, but yet they don't have the skill to really go forward, and they haven't done the development. And there's all kinds of issues. And typically that space tends to bounce, right? And then you get into the market and you're getting paid, 20% more than what you're actually worth in the market. That's where you're coming from. And then when you come to that phone screen and they ask about salary and you're fully transparent about what you just were paid in your last job, you've just disqualified yourself from being a candidate. So you have to really know what the salary range is for the job that you're applying for. And in fact, I would encourage people to vet this out before you even apply, because it is the key piece in that phone screen for HR to move you forward. If you're not sitting in the median, they're not going to move you forward, right? If you're in that red circle rate, that creates all kinds of issues. If you're on the lower end of the scale, it depends on the role, right? But the higher the level, the higher the risk. And so, know your worth tab on Glassdoor is an easy way to vet that out. PASA, pay scale, there's a lot of them out there. I'm not a fan of Glassdoor for other reasons, but I think some of their metrics are helpful. And you can, look at the Know Your Worth tab to kind of gauge where you are in the market. It'll assess your education, your experience, your background, your field, and the region and the industry. All those things come into play. And then you can look at target companies and look at what individuals are getting paid for that particular role. Or if you see a role, you can kind of research that out. The numbers tend to be all over sometimes. And typically in those middle level roles, it's less clear. But if you just shoot for the median, that's the safe bet. The other thing I'll say about it is you don't have to answer the question, right? So you can always throw it back on. And in fact, the majority of states now, it's illegal, right, to ask the question. So from HR, we can't ask what you were just paid. We can ask, what are your compensation expectations? What are your financial, were you looking, round out indirect, direct compensation? What does that look like for you? And you can always kick it back and say, can you share with me the salary range or pay band or grade for this role, and look to them to give you at least something to work with. And then that's information for you as a job seeker. Do you want to continue forward, as a candidate for that job? Is that going to meet your needs? So I think knowing your worth is key, but then also understanding what the range is for the job. And then if you are interested, make sure that, you state close to that median amount for the job. If you're higher, but you'd like that lower role or that less of pay because you want to get into that organization, then you need to speak to why and have it make sense so the HR knows that you're going to continue to be engaged at the lower rate.
That's a very good point. And Kushal just has a question as well about salary. So what do you do when the expected salary field on the when on the application is mandatory, but the job poster doesn't share the salary range?
Oh, sorry. I think you froze up on me for a minute. So.
Oh dear. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back now. So
oh, good.
I probably just went on way too long on that one. Sorry.
Oh, no. It was super helpful. And I especially liked your point about if you want to take a lower level role, and making it very clear as to why, right?
Yeah.
So
Because there are a lot of people, once they've kind of hit that apex of their career, especially as they're more advanced, they're wanting to take on more of a coaching and mentoring
right.
type position. The compensation is less of a driver for them, and it's more about being in the right environment or the right culture, and that compensates differently, right? So making it clear to HR as to why helps absolve issues with being overqualified, or maybe there's a reason why you're not continuing to advance. You're right. You just need to make it clear as to why, and have it provide value for what they would need for that role.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Put their minds at ease for sure.
Yeah.
So back to Michelle's question. So what do you do when the expected salary field on the application is mandatory, but the job poster doesn't share the salary range? So that's where the glass doors of the world come in.
Yeah.
He's applied with listing a salary based on research and still got rejected for over asking. Okay.
Well, this is tough. I don't know that I recommend this. I think if you do the range, if you vet out the range, and if that is a legitimate concern, go low, right? And then give yourself at least the opportunity to speak to it in that phone screen, right? But you also just need to decide for yourself what range you need to be in. Like, know your worth. I mean, you might think you're worth X, but you're actually not worth that. So you need to know exactly what you're worth in the market, and then look at the range for that job. And if it's range, if that's a concern, then you can always go low. But if it's a static field, I have seen people put like the number 1 just to have something in that space. And again, I recommend the research. Okay. Do your research. But if it's truly a concern, you can put a 1 in there. And I'll just say from HR, when I see that, I know what that is. I know that we need to have a conversation.
Right.
And if you're really the right fit and qualified, then we can speak to it in that conversation and kind of bypass the system that way.
Got it. Kind of like the Price is Right. It's what putting $1 in there.
Like the price is right.
Anyway, feeling nostalgic. Shreya has a question. I kept being told that 3+ years experience from well-known companies in India does not mean anything in USA. Is that true?
I think it's probably more true that you're not crafting the story to where you're really communicating the value of that experience. So I'll say from the side of HR again, it's not as, yes, we want to know the size of the company. We want to know the industry, the field, all those things, how they relate. We want to know that you can survive in this culture or this environment, this level, this pace, all those things. But what value did you bring, right? So I can work in the same company for 30 years and repeat the same day over and over for 30 years. And I'm really good at that one day, right? But, you've got to paint it out. So craft out those compelling stories in your resume. Use a model like SAR or CAR, where you're breaking it down. You're stating whatever the accomplishment or challenge or situation was, detail the action, bring it to scale, timelines, people, resources, costs, and then have your quantified metrics in there to add that weight validity. We see that model all the time online. It works. Front load your statements with that power, with the quantified metric up front. But again, make sure you're hitting on the key categories that are relevant for that job and state your value. So I might look at a candidate in like a startup. That doesn't really tell me too much about their day-to-day. You've got to detail out what that looks like. In HR, we can do like generalists do so many things. Bless them. They do so many things. But if I'm hiring for an HRBP in a very employee relations heavy role, I want to see information about your employee relations experience and how it
Right.
relates to the job. I'm not as concerned about benefits, compensation, training, development, recruiting, what have you, right? So it's, again, it's the tailoring and customization and clearly explaining how that translates to for them.
Yeah, 100%. You really want to paint a picture.
Yeah.
And so they can actually envision you in that job.
Yeah.
So great tips. All right. So just wanted to bring up another one of your visuals, my favorite. Actually, they're all my favorite, but anyway, I love them all. But this one really got me chuckling. Let me just close the other ones so I'm not having tech issues here. Let's see. There we go. There it is. Okay. All right.
Oh no.
The desperate donut.
I got so much interest. I got a lot of interesting feedback on this one. So that was good.
Was it positive or negative?
No, the majority of it was positive.
Okay.
I did get a couple people who felt like, and it's very justified. Like, I totally get this, right? They felt like that it should be totally okay to appear desperate. We're in a pandemic. Like, people are desperate. I get that. I really do. But it's psychology, you know, and at lower levels, I don't think it matters as much, but it is a huge investment the higher that you go in the company, right? And if it doesn't work out, it's an even bigger loss. So, you know, the biggest impact to the bottom line in HR is turnover and people not being the right fit. So we want, you know, we're going to be attracted to people who are employed, people who are top talent, people who know their worth, are confident about their value, are respectful if you're not the right fit, right? But you're qualified. Like, it's about making good connections and networking, even with prospective employers, right? So if you come to the table and it's just like you're just kind of spamming it out there, how available you are and how much you want to work, well, that's great, but it is sending the wrong message. It's not the message that you want to send, and it's not going to bringing awareness that way is not going to differentiate you from the volume, right? What's going to differentiate you is being highly qualified and the right fit for the job. So it's a bit of psychology, but it's also, you have to look at it from the hiring side too. They're protecting their better interests, you know, so.
Totally. And I mean, like, if you think of like dating,
It is like dating.
How attractive is someone who is like is desperate in trying to find a relationship? It just doesn't go over well.
It doesn't. And it tells something in your brain that, why are they so desperate?
Yeah.
Why are they trying so hard? Like, okay, but like, why? Right. So, I mean, it does give people pause. And I think just because you're qualified and available doesn't mean that you should be broadcasting that. Like, there's a lot of people who are qualified and available. What's going to set you apart is not being desperate, but showcasing your value.
Yeah, totally. Always comes down to that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Just want to check in with the chat. If you haven't, we've got about just over 5 minutes left. So if you have any questions for Emily, please put them in the chat on YouTube and in the comments on LinkedIn. If you don't have any questions, please give this video a reaction on LinkedIn or a like on YouTube. There was a question. James says, what if I'm a career changer and I don't have any quantified metrics?
Yeah, it's a good question. Not every field is going to really need the quantified metrics. Like, I have a lot of clients who are in IT And the quantified metrics don't hold the same weight. They're not in operations or business development. It's a different space, right? So when you look at quantified metrics, again, it's a way to add the weight and validity in behind your value, but you can do the same thing using like a SAR or CAR model,
Right.
absent of the metrics, right? And I will say too, when people just kind of throw like random metrics in there that, you know, you want the metrics to count. If you have metrics, they need to be good metrics too.
Yeah.
Like, don't just throw metrics in there just to have metrics, right?
No.
Like, so, yeah, good question though.
Yeah, for sure. And James, I actually wrote an article on JobScan where I gave 17 examples of non-quantifiable accomplishments. It's really like,
Perfect.
as Emily mentioned, it's the same approach. The SAR, CAR. I use the RAC approach, and it's all about the results. And when there is no number, it's about explaining the impact, the positive impact, the outcome. So don't worry, James. You don't need it in all cases. That reminds me of a funny story. One client I had was in a situation where he was putting metrics in because he thought he needed to put quantifiable accomplishments in. And one of them was something like closed 3 clients in the year. And I'm like, 3 clients? That doesn't sound very good. And I asked him, how much like revenue was that? He was like, oh, about 200 million. And I was like, okay, so that's a different conversation and a different metric.
Yeah, it's just as important to bring it to scale to help your reader understand what that value looked like to your previous employer.
Right.
I will say one thing that I wanted to mention too is that, you know, a lot of hiring isn't just about being, I mean, it is upfront about being qualified, right?
Right.
But on the back end of the process, it's about people, you hire people that you know, like, and trust. It's a respect thing. It's a trust thing. It's a connection thing. And you and I both know how powerful good networking is. And so as a job seeker, I just want to invite them to look at the process. How can you give forward to your prospective employer? Look at it that way. Things like following the process, right? Making it easy for HR to qualify you, appropriately following up. Even, you know, afterwards, if you're not the candidate and you don't move forward, thank them, be gracious, even offer, you know what, I know a guy, I think he'd be the right fit. You know, just giving forward, finding ways to make the process easier for them and really listening to what they're asking for. And then tailor your responses and content to provide those solutions. Make it less about you and more about them. And that will actually really help you get more traction on the other side.
For sure. For sure. That's a great reminder. I remember being rejected for jobs and getting the rejection and typing through gritted teeth.
Yeah, it's hard.
So like, I'm glad you found someone that was a good fit.
Yeah.
It was tough, but it goes a long way. And I had people come back and approach me again for other jobs. So
and they'll remember that. Truly, we do hire a lot of people who are kind of second and third in that funnel. And I recently read the book Go Giver.
Okay.
Go Giver. It's phenomenal. I think every job seeker needs to look at that because it's all about, you know, your value is stated in how much more you give, leaving people better off than when you find them and looking for opportunities to give and serve on the other side. And I think job seekers get a little disconnected on this because it's all about them. So great book. I'm definitely going to promote that for my clients as well. It's fantastic.
Go Giver. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. And there was just a question, is this session being recorded? It is. So you can catch the replay on LinkedIn or YouTube, whichever you prefer. So with 1 minute left, I just wanted to ask you, where can people best connect with you? LinkedIn, obviously. Where else?
LinkedIn is my primary source of connection. I do have, you know, Facebook and Twitter, and that's great. but it really, it really is. LinkedIn is where I do most of my networking connections and with clients. But yeah, that is the best place. And then too, I've got my website, hrlogicsolutions.com, and my email, emily@hrlogicsolutions.com. And I've got a new website in the works, so that'll be fun too.
Nice. Oh, that's fun. New websites are always exciting. I love that. Yeah. So on YouTube, I've linked to Emily's LinkedIn profile, so you can grab that in the description if you'd like to connect. And before you leave tonight, please give this video a reaction and a like on YouTube. And Emily, I just wanted to thank you so much for all the amazing insights you've provided today. An hour flew by. And I still have more questions for you. And I can see a few more questions coming in, which unfortunately we're not going to get to. But again, you can find Emily over on LinkedIn and comment on her posts there. And I'm sure she'll see it there. So
absolutely. Kamara, you are amazing. And I've just admired your work since day one. So truly an honor. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's so much fun.
Oh, thank you so much. I've had so much fun with you, and I really appreciate all the value you've brought tonight, and I'm sure the listeners and viewers do too. So thank you so much. Have a great evening, everyone. We'll see you next Thursday.
Okay. Take care. Bye.